But all of my friends are going on the trip, Grandma. I cried out in anguish.
We can't afford it, Mia.
My grandfather replied softly. It's only because you're only working as a guard, I said to him bitterly as I pushed my bowl of soup away and got up rushing to my room.
Carla, behave.
I heard my grandma shout behind me. I was exhausted of living with my grandparents. I had to compromise on everything. All of my classmates were going on the trip except me. I couldn't even buy a new dress for prom last year. My grandma bought me a donated dress from church. One of my classmates had even announced to the whole school that I was wearing the dress her mom had thrown out a month ago. I didn't want to tell any of my friends that my grandfather was a security guard at the local mall we often visited on Shaw Avenue. I wouldn't have been able to handle the embarrassment. I told my classmates that my grandparents were planning to take me on a trip to Malibu for the weekend, and thus I had planned to ditch the school trip for a weekend at the beach. I knew that I would have no pictures to show them, but I decided that that was a problem for a later me. They all seemed rather jealous of me, and that helped lessen my disappointment. As I walked home alone that evening, I noticed a car following behind me slowly. I always took the long route home so none of my classmates would find out where I really lived. I stopped at a small pretzel cart so that the car would move ahead and stop following me. However, to my surprise, the car stopped right in front of the pretzel cart and a man in a navy blue suit came out. He looked exceptionally clean and rich, which calmed me down, and I decided that I was just imagining him following me. As I continued walking ahead, he rushed to my side, and to my surprise, he called out, "Carla." I looked around assuming it was just someone else with the same name, but then he stood right in front of me and gave me a huge smile. "I've already found you, Mija." "Mija? I don't know who you are." I snapped back at him. I knew better than to indulge in conversation with strangers.
"It's me, Dad,"
he replied excitedly. "Dad? Look, I don't have a dad, and if you don't leave right now, I will start screaming," I said to him sternly.
"Come on, Carla. Don't you remember me at all? I'm the one to blame for this, really. It's me, William Gardner, your father," he said, looking at me solemnly.
"How am I supposed to believe you? I haven't seen my dad in 11 years, I said to him. I noticed that the man did bear resemblance to me. His hair was auburn just like mine, and he even had freckles on his nose, just like me.
"Well, I know your mother, Mary Monroy. Are you still living with Mr. and Mrs. Monroy?"
He began telling me all the details of my life. I began to believe it really was my father. I felt a warm tingle in my heart. My father had finally decided to come back. For me, I told him Mom had passed away 2 years after he left, and I was living with my maternal grandparents since then. He seemed genuinely hurt, knowing that Mom had passed away. He was also gravely concerned about my upbringing and my lifestyle, since he knew that my grandparents weren't really well off. He told me that he had come to the city only to look for me, so I decided to take him home with me. My grandparents didn't really approve of Dad since he had left me and Mom without a penny on the streets, but that was years ago, and I was sure that they had forgotten about all of it by now. As I sat in the car, I looked around in awe. We only owned a bicycle that Grandpa used to get to the mall, so a car was a dream to me. My father seemed to have noticed my admiration and asked me, "You like it?" I just nodded my head and gave him a smile.
"It's all yours, Mija. I plan to give you everything that I've been unable to in all these years. I'm so sorry for everything. You can't imagine how much I regret my actions, but I promise I will make it to you,"
he said to me, touching my head lovingly. When he had left, I was only 5, so I didn't really remember a lot. I was just glad that he had come back and was willing to help us out. My grandparents didn't seem to share the same vision. They greeted my father rather coldly, even though he kept apologizing. When he asked them if he could stay with us for a few days, my grandma began to protest. "Here, we don't have enough space." She glanced my fallen expression and at my hand wrapped around his arms and suddenly said,
But I'm sure you'll be able to manage in the living room couch, William.
He smiled at her kindly.
Of course, it has all the space I need,
he said. At dinner, I decided to mention the school trip again, but my grandparents seemed sure about their decision to not send me anywhere. They didn't have any savings for extra expenditure, they protested. However, Dad suddenly interjected and said,
There is no way you're missing out, Carla. Go get the consent form. I will pay for the trip.
I stared at him, with my eyes widened in bewilderment. Really? I asked him.
Anything for you, Mija,
he said to me softly. That was the best night of my entire week. I drifted off to sleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. It was Thursday night, and I was rolling around the house, packing my bag for the trip the next day. The bus would leave in the evening, so we still had school in the morning, and I didn't want to come home to pack again.
How about you skip school tomorrow, Carla?
Dad asked, forking his chicken. No, Carla never misses school, and I see no occasion for it anyway. Grandma replied before I could say anything.
Well, as you were packing, I noticed most of your clothes are old. We can have a shopping trip, just you and me. What do you think?
He asked, grinning at me knowing I would jump at the opportunity. Really? Oh my God, yes! I replied to him, beaming.
It'll be a great time for us to bond, Mrs. Monroy. I have missed so much of her life anyway,
he said to my grandma as she stared at him, sneering. The next morning, I woke up early even though I hadn't slept well with the excitement of not only the school trip, but also shopping with Dad. We left right after breakfast. Even Dad seemed in a hurry for the shopping excursion. I thought he was also excited to be spending time with me. My grandparents never left us alone in a room at the house anyway. Perhaps he was smiling for a chance to speak to me alone. I was glued to my phone texting my friends while we were driving to the mall, and when I looked up, I couldn't recognize the neighborhood. We had been driving for a long time, so I asked Dad where we were going.
Just sit tight, Carla,
he said as he lit a cigarette. I had never seen him smoke before, but I kept mum and rolled down the windows, feeling a bit suffocated and nervous. When he started driving into a narrow dirt road, I asked him to stop the car. I knew he was my father, but it still felt unsafe. We reached a small cottage, and he stopped the car asking me to get down. I decided to call my grandparents, but as soon as they picked up, he snatched my phone. Carla! Grandma called out on phone.
Mother-in-law,
he exclaimed.
It's me, William,
he replied to her. Oh, where is Carla? Isn't this her phone? Grandma asked him.
She's with me, obviously. I'm going to keep my daughter with me, dearest mother-in-law. Like I said yesterday, we need time to bond, and while we do that, I am expecting to have $1,000 in my bank account. That is, if you want to see this little brat again,
he said, snickering. William, she is your daughter. What are you doing? Grandma cried out. That's it. I am calling the police, she said, breathing heavily.
Come on, mother-in-law. It would really bother me to hurt my own daughter. Let's keep this within the family, okay? As soon as I have my money, I will drop her off,
he said to her viciously. I watched him, with tears streaming down my cheeks. I had always heard bad things about him, but I never prepared for a day when he would kidnap me, his own daughter. The next few moments went by in a blur. I was screaming and crying while he dragged me to the dimly lit cottage. It smelled of alcohol and burnt leather. He pushed me into the cottage and left, locking me inside. When he returned, he was limping and reeking of alcohol. My eyes were stinging from all the crying as I looked up at him. He fell into the plastic chair in the room and whispered,
Sweetheart, don't hate me too much. You won't understand it yet. It's so difficult to survive in the world, especially without this,
he said, pointing to an empty alcohol bottle in the corner.
I lost my job, and nobody would hire me. I saw you at the mall and recognized you. I thought the Monroys had finally made enough money to have their granddaughter shopping in the mall. I was so disappointed to see how you were living, though. No, not for you, but for me. I had planned to ask for $3,000, but now I'll have to settle with 1,000.
He said, sighing and closing his eyes. When he didn't move for a while, I thought to myself that this was my only chance. He had probably passed out. I knew my grandparents didn't have $1,000. I couldn't depend on the money to get out of here. I dashed to the door, but he flung his eyes open. He tried to reach for me but fell to the floor in his intoxication. I locked him in as I ran outside. It was already dark outside. I rushed to the car, remembering that my phone was still there as he banged on the door, shouting out profanities. I called the police and explained my situation and my surroundings to them. They reassured me that they would be there soon and asked me to hide at a safe place until I heard the police siren. An operator kept speaking to me while I walked out to the main road through the narrow dirt lane. I hid in the shadows of the trees until I heard the police sirens. It didn't take them long to find me. I heaved a sigh of relief and called my grandparents after thanking the operator. I told them that I was safe and apologized to them for causing them so much trouble. When I was done giving my statement, I saw my grandparents arrive in a taxi. They hugged me and apologized for sending me alone with my father. They knew that he had a small criminal record and that he was alcoholic, but they wanted to believe that he had changed for me, especially when they saw so much hope in my eyes for him. We spent the next few days visiting the police station and the court every day. My father was charged with a case for kidnapping me, and my grandparents also filed a restraining order against him. He was also charged to pay a large amount of money since he had never paid any child support to my mother or my grandparents in all these years. Grandma said that it was definite that he would stay in debt for his entire lifetime. For the first time in recent years, I wasn't embarrassed of my grandparents, but instead ashamed of how I had been behaving around them. I had always taken them for granted, never realizing that I was never their responsibility to begin with. But they had taken me in themselves as a responsibility to make sure I had a better life, away from my father. I realized the meaning of having a better life as well. It wasn't about school trips, better clothes, and more money. It was simply about the decisions we took for ourselves that decided the nature of our life. I had finally learned to make the right decisions. I knew what was important now, and that was to honor the life I was given by my grandparents.